Spend enough time in this community and you'll inevitably come across the age-old debate on whether old anime is better or worse than new anime. It's a question that everyone more or less has their own answer for, but one factor I think that gets left out a lot in these discussions is just how much older anime we like to forget about. Like, yeah, when you're comparing Full Metal Alchemist to I Got a Cheat Skill in Another World and became unrivaled in the real world too, you're obviously going to see a preference for those classic anime, but to really get a good grasp of what it was like, it does help to do a little dumpster spelunking. Put down the rose-tinted glasses and suddenly the past isn't always that bright. Continuing the tradition of digging up skeletons that should have remained in the closet, I've got the random anime generator to spit me out 3 more anime this month to give a good old 3-episode sampler to see if it's maybe worth seeing to completion. Some will fall, others will triumph, but hopefully regardless of what happens, we can all have a good laugh throughout. Life isn't a tragedy, it's a comedy. Considering I've already talked about them way back in episode 3, you're probably already aware that I have a bit of a bone to pick with Netflix original anime. 2018 was a pretty big year for them, all things considered. The year started off strong with the release of Devilman Crybaby in January that single-handedly told the community that Netflix was actually quite willing to put in the work when they wanted to and could throw fuck you money around like it was nobody's business. Then again, this was also the same season they used that money to lock Violet Evergarden in a Netflix jail, so maybe it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, but no point getting lost in the details. The winter season would also see them release the unfortunately disappointing crime drama Be the Beginning, and the topic of interest to us today, the Bones original sci-fi series A.I.C.O Incarnation. A classification I should add is given to it by pretty much every site I checked, despite also acknowledging that a corresponding manga series started releasing in 2017, so take all of that as you will. A.I.C.O takes place in the closer-than-you-think future of 2037, where following the aftermath of a mass casualty incident known as the Burst, an artificial life form known as matter is starting to spread out from Ground Zero and threatens some real nasty shit if it manages to break into the main waterways. A story follows high schooler A.I.C.O Tachibana, a cripple who becomes uncrippled when she meets the mysterious Yuya Kanzaki, only to then be told that not only is she herself an artificial life form, but also inadvertently the cause of and only known way of stopping the burst. Thus, she joins a colorful team of teenagers tasked with fighting the matter known as divers, in hopes of rescuing her mother and brother, who she long assumed to have died in that initial incident. I find sci-fi plots with this much setup can often be a little convoluted and overly focused on the sci-fi thing, and while A.I.C.O does have plenty of that and not much of what it has to say is particularly interesting, it does balance a lot of it out with some decent characters and action that keeps its plot going. Besides the mandatory exposition dump at the start of the story, it also does set up for some potential later plot points quite nicely, and I only hope it gets decent payoffs. Now, this is a Netflix original sci-fi show, and so of course it isn't without its problems. For starters, the actual sci-fi waxing on philosophically isn't particularly interesting. There's something here about artificial life forms and secret government conspiracies. It's just a tad too cliche for the genre, and it isn't helped by the fact that A.I.C.O herself is kind of awful. Her English VA isn't exactly doing the best job, and at least in these early 3 episodes, she often just serves as a tool for the writers to exposit more than being an actual character. On one hand, it does get a lot of the setup out of the way so the action plot can kick in later, but when you're on as strict of a deadline as I give these series, time is everything. There's some decent setup for some conflict later on, considering we're told that her mere presence on the divers team will make the mission more challenging, and it does seem like someone will die, but how much of her being a whiny plot convenience do I have to sit through to get there? I yearn for true gender equality. Female MCs can be just as bad as male ones. I feel like I spent a lot of time on this show just trying to get across how weird the 2000s were for anime. It was a bit of a weird transitional time for the medium as digital animation and coloring started to see wider adoption, along with other tech that sometimes worked out and sometimes didn't. While the latter half of the decade would see an explosion of variety within the medium in terms of style and genre at the highest level of works, the same can't always be said for those that are more in the weeds. I will admit that I'm not the most nostalgic for this period of history. A lot of the shows from this time have awkward digital color grading, and the influx of space western style shows that awkwardly copy designs from 2 genres that don't so easily fit together isn't great. And the fact that many are only available in low-resolution rips doesn't help too much either. Smack dab in the middle of this awkward phase of anime history is the year 2005, most known for Eureka 7, Mushishi Hellgirl, Aria the Animation, and not a whole lot else. It's kind of a weird year, given that it's sandwiched between a year that gave us some of the best titles of the early 2000s, and the year that would kickstart reshaping this medium into an unrecognizable new form. But hey, I mean, they can't all be winners. Lord knows we're in a similar dry spell right now. Releasing in the fall of that year, Black Cat is a battle shonen following the exploits of Train Hartnett, an expert assassin working under the alias Black Cat for the nefarious Kronos organization, and Sven Volfeld, a sweeper whose job is basically that of a hitman, except he has to bring his targets back alive. Obviously, the crossover in these job markets causes these two to cross paths, and what you expect from a story like this ensues. I know I spent a paragraph basically shitting on the anime of this era, but if there's one thing that I can give Black Cat credit for, is that it absolutely nails the rule of cool. The first episode is a nice blend of tension, humor, and mystery to get you hooked into its setting and characters, and holds that momentum well throughout the end of episode 3. Production at the hands of Studio Gonzo during their prime provides the show with some decent animation, and while the colors can sometimes be all over the place, when the show gets cooking, it can look damn near impressive. Even in just 3 episodes, we get some nice development for Black Cat and what looks to be the making of a character arc for him moving forward. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. The 2000s era style with its extremely detailed hair sometimes sticks out like a sore thumb, and the colors, again, can be a little too much at times. The tone is also kind of all over the place. The show has decent enough comedic timing, but the way in which it uses it at times to diffuse the tension in the scene makes it feel like it doesn't want to be too serious without knowing any good ways of necessarily accomplishing that without uncalled for punchlines. It's far from a masterpiece, that's for sure, but I can definitely see it going the distance if it holds back on not having mech fights and manages to stick its back end, which shows this era were rather notorious for not being able to do. So you know what they say about curiosity. Going into this video series, I'd figured I'd be spending a lot of time talking about isekai, and yet, surprisingly, that hasn't really been the case. Out of 36 series so far, I've only talked about one isekai in Kamikatsu, and I've instead spent more time talking about straight fantasies and the depths they're willing to sink to. I get it though, for as much as works like Final Fantasy and Lord of the Rings are engraved in our public conscious, it is surprisingly difficult to not only write a fantasy world and setting, but to do it convincingly enough as to feel effortless. Anime is certainly full of many such examples of great fantasy worlds over the years, and likewise countless amateurs looking to strike gold and do the same. Released in 2017, Granblue Fantasy the Animation is an adaptation of Cygames' 2014 mobile game by the same name. In recent memory, Cygames has made a name for itself for their adaptations, most notably 2020's Princess Connect Redive and the 2018 Uma Musume multimedia project. But before all of that, there was Granblue Fantasy. Animated by A1 Pictures, Granblue follows the story of Gran, a farm boy thrust into a life of adventure after getting entangled in the escape plans of a young girl named Lyria from the Erst Empire. Gran, alongside his marketable sidekick Vern, decide to help Lyria, pissing off the Empire and forcing Gran to abandon his humble roots and take off into the skies with his newfound companions. The first more obvious thing to point out about Granblue Fantasy is that it looks kinda decent actually. I like the scratchy, pencil-like line work, and the muted colors are a nice change of pace from the often more vibrant palettes that you see in similar shows, and especially the wave of isekai that would soon flood the genre. The backgrounds are quite nice, with the sky focus not being particularly novel, but still executed pretty well considering how little we actually see of it across all of anime. It feels strongly reminiscent of classic Final Fantasy style stories, which makes sense given that the art director for the original game, Hideo Manaba, also worked on Final Fantasy back in the 90s. Definitely the kind of setting, given the right conditions, that could be really fun to see more of. The problem, however, is that while Granblue Fantasy rocks some decently impressive art, its story leaves much to be desired. The pacing doesn't give its characters much room to breathe, and a lot of the plot beats start feeling like you're watching a game tutorial, since you kinda are. The whole thing is, just from what I can tell, a straightforward adaptation of the game's story, but in that it doesn't offer nearly enough changes to make the story fit the medium it's being adapted into. The characters also vary in quality, with the fuzzy mascot being particularly annoying, and the villains being so comically evil as to ruin a lot of what otherwise could make for a decent enough story. Lord knows it's not the first adaptation I've seen suffer from these issues, or the worst, and I know it won't be the last. Despite my better judgment, I've been gorging myself on so many pre-digital shows that I was willing to use A.I.C.O Incarnation as a palate cleanser, and I mean, yeah, it was exactly that. The execution characters are kind of lacking, but it holds itself together enough to at least be watchable. Crazy to think this was made by Studio Bones of all people, but I mean, I guess every studio needs its stinkers. Metallic Rouge would like a word. Every once in a blue moon I find a show here that surprises me and makes my life a lot easier, and this month Black Cat more than delivered its cruise to an easy completion. The show does see a small tonal and personality shift once Train joins our main group, but as a whole the series keeps its wits about it and matches some biting comedy and action with some at times impressive animation work. The ending arc is a bit of a letdown and is kind of all over the place, but I can appreciate the attempt to try to tie everything up, and the characters more than make up for it even if the roster is a little bloated by the end. Maybe this whole mid-2000s shonen thing isn't too bad after all. Finally, while it fares better than some of the other shows I've covered in this spot, Granblue Fantasy still isn't able to muster up the confidence to avoid the dropped list. With some changes to the script, a better fuzzy mascot, and some room to breathe with the pacing, this one probably has the most potential of everything else that I've dropped in this kind of fantasy genre, but I don't watch shows on promise of something maybe happening, and 2 cores is a lot to ask for. With that, I hope you enjoyed. Life's been all over the place recently, and I'm doing my best to get back on schedule with these uploads, but no promises. I don't have any intention on stopping this series anytime soon, so be aware that there is always a new episode somewhere in production. Regardless, I hope you've been enjoying the series thus far, and remember to like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like it in the future. Comment down below your thoughts on the series I covered here today, and follow me on these websites to see more of me. Until next time, always remember to stay salty.